In a climate-controlled case at the Rubin collection lies a folded manuscript, 19th century, pigment and ink on paper. Its long pages crowded with animal-headed figures. It is catalogued as C. 2004, 37-3, and the West renamed the text it carries the Book of the Dead. That is not its name. Its name means liberation through hearing. It was not written to be studied. It was read into the ear of a corpse. And it claims that in the first seconds after your breathing stops, a door opens. One exit. Offered once. Almost no one takes it. Here is what it says. Look at the book again. Not the myth around it. The object. Long unbound leaves, painted with peaceful faces and furious ones. Letters running in vertical columns down each page. A thing you could stand in front of. And the strange part is not that it exists. The strange part is what it was for. Because a book meant for a library does not get whispered to a dead man. This one did. For centuries, in Tibet and across the Himalaya, this text was carried to the side of the newly dead, opened, and read aloud to a body that could no longer answer, not as a eulogy, as instructions. The reader sat with a corpse and talked it through something, step by step, the way you would talk a person through a procedure they had never done before and would only get to do once. Start with the name, because the name was the first thing changed. In the West, it is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a title chosen about a century ago to echo the Egyptian Book of the Dead and make it legible to European readers. Its real Tibetan name is Bardo Thödol. Bardo, the gap, the in-between, the interval after one life and before the next. Thödol, liberation through hearing. Sit with that second word, because everything hangs on it. Not liberation through study, not through ritual, not through offering, not through a lifetime of merit, through hearing. The text is built to work on someone whose only remaining capacity is to hear, someone who cannot see, cannot speak, cannot act, someone lying still while another person reads. The title itself tells you who the audience is. The audience is the dead. And that is where the comfortable reading starts to strain. You were told to expect mythology here, poetry about the soul, symbolic images dressed up by a culture that feared death, the way every culture does. That reading is easy, and for long stretches of the text it almost holds. But a myth does not usually come with a procedure, and this text is nothing but procedure. It names a full route, 3 stages, 3 bardos, running as long as 49 days from the moment of death to the next birth. It counts them. It orders them. It tells a living reader exactly what to say and precisely when to say it to someone who has just stopped breathing. It gives durations. It gives a physical sign to watch the body for. Mythology does not usually need a stopwatch. This one carries one. So let us do what almost no retelling does. Set aside the 49 days, set aside the famous journey, the deities, the long road everyone describes. Go to the very first station, the first seconds, because that is where the whole text is actually pointing, and it is the exact part that gets cropped out of every popular version. The route begins the instant the breath stops, not a day later, not after some passage or some tunnel, immediately. The text instructs the reader to lean in close to the ear of the body and to begin at once. And the first words are not a prayer. They are an address, with the dead person's own name dropped into the middle of them. "O nobly born," it says, and then the reader inserts the name of whoever is lying there. "The time hath now come for thee to seek the path. Thy breathing is about to cease." Spoken to you as if you are still listening, as if the reader is certain something is still there to hear it. And notice what the text is doing. It is not describing the afterlife to you from a distance. It is orienting you. It is telling you where you are and what happens next, the way you would steady someone reaching for a handle in the dark. Left hand, now, here. Then it opens the door. This is the center of the entire thing, and it is the part almost nobody knows is there. At the moment of death, the text says, "A light dawns." Not a light in the room, the clear light. In the tradition, it has a name. The ground luminosity, the bare ground of your own mind laid open. And the text describes it arriving in overwhelming clarity. Vast, like the whole sky gone bright and empty at once, wherein all things are like the void and cloudless sky, and the naked, spotless intellect is like unto a transparent vacuum without circumference or center. And here is the instruction attached to it. Not to worship it, not to beg it, to recognize it. The text insists this light is not something outside you, arriving to weigh you or to judge. It says, the light is you. Thine own intellect, it reads, unobstructed, shining, thrilling, and blissful, is the very consciousness, the all-good Buddha. Recognize the light as your own mind, the text says, and you are free. You do not walk the route at all. You step out through the first door and the journey never touches you. Read that again as procedure, not poetry. There is a station, there is a required action, and the action is recognition. There is a stated outcome, liberation, the end of the road before it begins. And there is a window, because the text does not say the light waits patiently for you to be ready. It says it dawns and it goes. And the way the oldest English translation measures that window is almost unbearable in how ordinary it is. The primary clear light lasts, it says, about the time required for eating a meal. That is, the size of the exit. Not a lifetime, not an age, about as long as it takes to eat. A cosmic door held open for roughly the length of dinner and then closing. Now, hold both images at once. On one side, a light the size of the sky, offered as total freedom, the single most important moment the text describes. On the other, a kitchen timer. That contradiction is not a flaw in the text. It is the tension the whole thing runs on. The offer is real, and the offer is brief, and the text is completely matter-of-fact about both. It is not trying to console you. It is trying to make sure you do not sleep through your one window. And here is the line that gives this its name. Almost nobody takes it. The text says so directly. It expects the recognition to fail. It even names the failure of the very people you would bet on to succeed. Here, it says, some there may be who have listened much yet not recognized. People who studied, people who prepared their whole lives, people who heard these exact instructions 100 times. The light dawns, the door stands open, and they do not recognize it as their own mind, so they do not step through. The tradition is blunt about what happens instead. The ordinary being faints, loses consciousness at the precise instant consciousness was being handed a way out. And you can feel why, if you are honest. A lifetime of grasping at things, of taking every appearance as something outside you to want or to fear, does not switch off because the heart stopped. The habit reaches for the light the way it reached for everything else, as an other, as a something, as not me. And in that flinch, the recognition is missed. The exit is not hidden, it is not locked, it is standing wide open, and the traveler faints in the doorway. And the instruction for the moment is not to do more, it is to do less. The text does not tell the dead to fight toward the light, or to earn it, or to perform anything. It tells them to rest, to let the mind settle exactly as it is and not grab, not flee, not turn the light into an object to reach for. The whole task is to stop doing the one thing a mind has done every second of its life, which is to split the world into a self in here and a something out there. For that instant, the text says, the split is gone on its own, handed to you for free, and all you have to do is not rebuild it. That is what makes it so hard. Not that the exit is far, but that it is too close, too simple, too much like doing nothing, and a frightened mind cannot believe the door is that easy. So it reaches, and reaching, it closes the door itself. The tradition has a name for what recognition would have felt like, and it sharpens the whole picture. It calls it the meeting of mother and child. The ground luminosity that dawns at death is the mother. The luminosity you would have glimpsed in meditation, in life, through training, is the child. Recognition is the child running to the mother, one light knowing itself in the other, which means the recognition was never meant to be improvised at the deathbed. It was meant to be rehearsed for years, so that when the great light finally dawns, some part of you says, quietly, I know you, instead of recoiling. That is why the reader keeps reading. The reader is not narrating a story. The reader is trying to keep an untrained mind awake through the one moment it was least prepared for. And the text gives that reader a protocol, and the protocol is grim in its precision. Keep reciting, it instructs. Keep saying the words into the ear. And it tells the reader the physical sign that the body has truly finished, the point past which the first light has come and gone. Continue, it says, until a yellowish liquid beginneth to appear from the various apertures of the corpse. That is the checklist detail. That is the sentence that stops sounding like scripture. No poem tracks fluid, leaving a body to decide which paragraph to read next. A manual does that. A field procedure does that. The text treats the corpse as a system with observable states, and it tells the operator which state to wait for. And the reading did not stop after those first seconds. That is the other thing the summaries flatten. The recitation was meant to continue, return to again and again over the days that followed, because the text assumed the first exit would be missed and built for the long odds after it. A reader might come back to the body, or to a name card standing in for a body already gone, and keep reading through the stages, keeping pace with a journey he could not see, trusting the schedule on the page to tell him where the dead now were. He read to something that gave him no feedback at all. He simply kept his place in the procedure and read the next instruction on time. Picture that. A man reading turn-by-turn directions aloud in an empty room, certain the traveler is somewhere on the route, and afraid of what happens if the next instruction arrives late. And there is a second door. The text is merciful in its architecture, if in nothing else. If the primary clear light is missed, a secondary clear light follows it. Dimmer, narrower, a second, weaker chance to recognize the same thing before the road takes hold. It is offered quickly, it is offered once, and then it too is gone. Two graded exits, in strict order, each with its own moment and its own fading. That is not the shape of a symbol. That is the shape of a sequence someone built to be walked, with a fallback in case the first attempt fails. Miss both, and only then does the famous part begin. The part every retelling opens with. The feint breaks, and you come to inside the second Bardo, the Bardo of reality, and the visions start. The peaceful deities first, radiant, and then the wrathful ones, the animal-headed figures, painted right across the manuscript, in that case at the Rubin. Then the third Bardo, the Bardo of becoming, and the slow magnetic pull toward a new birth, 49 days of it. That is the journey people mean when they say the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But look at what has actually happened in the structure. The whole long road, the deities, the terror, the 49 days, all of it is what happens after you have already failed the first test. The journey is the consequence. The exit was at the beginning, and it is the beginning that gets left out. That is the station the summaries skip. Open almost any popular version and it starts mid-route, with the deities, with the drama and the color and the fear, because that part is vivid and easy to picture. The first seconds get compressed into a single sentence, if they appear at all. But in the text itself, the first seconds are the entire point. Everything after them is what the text is straining to help you avoid. We kept the maze and edited out the way through the first door. We kept the long corridor everyone ends up walking and cut the moment where the wall was open. You should also know how this book reached that case, because the survival is part of the strangeness. By tradition, the text was composed in the 8th century by the teacher Padma Sambhava, written down, and then deliberately hidden, concealed, as what Tibetans call terma, a treasure buried to wait for the right century. Roughly 600 years later, in the 14th, a man named Karma Lingpa is said to have discovered it. Scholars are careful here, and so are we. The attribution to the 8th century is traditional, and what can be dated with more confidence is the 14th century revealed text and the tradition that carries it. Either way, the point stands. This is not a document that sat safe on a shelf. It was hidden, recovered, hand-copied, and carried across mountains for generations. And the copy in that case is a 19th century Mongolian one, not an original at all. The instructions survived by being copied by hand, over and over, by people who believed it had to be ready at the next deathbed. You do not take that kind of trouble to preserve a poem. You take it to preserve directions you cannot afford to lose. Look once more at those painted pages, because the pictures are doing a job most decoration never does. The illustrations are not there to be beautiful. They translate the written instructions into shapes a mind is meant to recognize, faces and colors and animal heads tied to the elements, so that the figures arriving in the later Bardos would already be familiar, already rehearsed, already known before they came. A picture you have studied is a picture you might recognize in the dark. The manuscript is, in that sense, a training document as much as a script, and the whole system rests on one verb repeated at every stage. Recognize. Recognize the light. Recognize the peaceful ones. Recognize the wrathful ones as your own mind and not as monsters coming for you. The entire route is a series of recognitions the traveler keeps failing, and the painted pages were an attempt to load the answers in advance, the way you would memorize the exits of a building before the smoke. And the directions have been quietly reshaped in translation, which is its own thread of tension. The version most of the world knows came through a single English edition, assembled about a century ago from a Tibetan Lama's rendering. And it is the one that handed us the phrase Book of the Dead in the first place. Later scholars retranslated the whole cycle, more completely and more carefully. A version came in the 1970s from a translator working with a Tibetan teacher in exile, another in the 1990s, and finally a complete translation of the entire cycle a few decades ago. The first time the whole thing had been carried into English rather than the fragment the West had fixed on. Across all of them, edition after edition, the deathbed language stayed. But go back to that hinge word, Thödol, liberation through hearing. A softer translator could have written liberation through study or through contemplation, and the text would have become a book about the mind for the living. It does not say that. It says hearing. It keeps its audience pinned as someone who can only listen. Every honest translation has had to preserve that because it is what the text actually claims, and it is the least comfortable thing about it. So what is this actually? Here is the honest part, placed now, after you have seen the rest, and not before. The mainstream reading is not foolish. Scholars and the psychologist Carl Jung, who wrote a commentary attached to that famous English edition, read the Bardos as projections of the mind, the imagery as symbol, the whole passage as a map of consciousness, rather than a literal report from the dead. That reading is serious, and it may be right. And whether anything like the clear light corresponds to what dying people actually experience is not something anyone can test or prove, and this is not going to pretend otherwise. But notice what the symbolic reading has to keep quietly working around. It explains the light. It has a harder time explaining the timer. It explains the visions as archetypes. It has a harder time explaining why the text watches a corpse for fluid to decide when to turn the page. Symbols do not usually come with a stopwatch and a checklist and a sign to wait for. The text has not changed, only the reading did. It still says what it said when it was read into the ear of the dead, that the door is first, not last, that the light lasts about as long as a meal. That recognition is the whole task, and that it was meant to be practiced for years before the night it counts, that almost no one manages it anyway. We renamed it, we shelved it, we called it mythology, and we put it under glass. And the folded pages in that case at the Rubin, c. 2004, 37, 3, 19th century, pigment and ink, animal-headed deities running down every leaf, still carry the same instruction they always did. The official reading still calls it a symbol. The directions still read like directions. The exit is still the first station. And it is still, according to the text, standing open for about the length of one meal, waiting for someone to recognize a light and say, "I know you." Almost no one does. The book is still there. You can go and look at it.